What? A best books of the year list already? Yes, even though it is only the end of October, this is a list of the 10 best books of 2020. And this isn't my own list. I need to specify that right off. I do like to make my own list of favorite books that I read over the course of the year at the end of the year. But this is a list that was published by Publishers Weekly, where they've already picked their 10 favorite books of the year, according to a group of critics who write reviews for their publication. And I want to talk about this list for a couple of reasons. Well, actually for a few reasons. First off, I'm sure we're all happy for 2020 to be over and done with. And then secondly, I think we want to look back on this year and maybe see some good things that came out of this year. You know, a lot of great books have been published, and I think that's a good thing to look back and reflect upon and celebrate for this year, alongside all of the bad stuff that have come along. And then thirdly, I also just love lists like this and, looking over best books of the year and seeing what I've missed that has come out, even though, I try to stay up on top of a lot of new publications, especially because this is an American list. So some of these books I've never heard of before. And I think this will be, sort of a good guideline of books I should try to read before the end of the year, now that, I still have a couple months left. And I have only read one of the books on this list. So I'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but also I want to go through all of the other books and give descriptions of them in case they're ones that you're interested in reading, or if they're ones that you have read and you would really recommend. Let me know about that in the comments below. First off is a nonfiction book called The Address Book by Deirdre, and it's subtitled What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Wealth, Race, and Power. It talks about the stories and histories behind street names and how this reveals who matters and who doesn't according to the history books. And this feels very topical because, it's been a big issue of public debate about statues being displayed and what that says about our history and who we revere. And this looks at the names of streets all the way from ancient Roman times up until the present day. Bluebeard's First Wife by Seong-Nan, and it's translated from the Korean by Janet Han. So this is a collection of short stories exploring guilt, hope, and pain in the lives of people in modern-day South Korea. And I think it does this with a sort of feminist slant, as you can tell from the title, which is a play off from the classic fairy tale of Bluebeard. These stories are described as dark, strange, and sometimes shocking because the author can describe these ordinary domestic scenes which can quickly flip to harrowing violence. Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. This is another nonfiction book that investigates the history of the unspoken and race-based caste system within the United States. And she draws parallels with the caste system in Nazi Germany and India to debunk widespread myths about US history. And it's worth noting also that Isabel Wilkerson is the first woman of African American heritage to win the Pulitzer Prize in Journalism. The Dragons, the Giant, the Women by Wayetu. This is a memoir which is told like a lyrical folk tale. It describes how the author was born in war-torn Liberia and how her family escaped to America, and it recounts her childhood growing up in Texas and the racially fraught romances of her college years, and it also describes how her mother went back to Africa in order to try to save her family. I first heard about this book when Anne Patchett was being interviewed alongside Tayari Jones at a Women's Prize online event, and she described this book and how much she loved it, and so I bought it on audiobook, and I've been really looking forward to reading it. Homeland Elegies by Akhtar. This is a novel, but it's described as a work of autofiction because the narrator is also called Ayed, and similar to the author, was born in Staten Island to Pakistani parents. The book is structured in 8 chapters that resembles musical movements, and they reckon with the promises and deceptions of the American dream by recounting the the relationships with a number of key figures in the narrator's life, including the narrator's father, who is a doctor that worked for Donald Trump in the first 2 years of his presidency. It's meant to be a book that is both very humorous but also heartbreaking. The Last Great Road Bum by Hector Tobar. This is a novel which reimagines the life of Joe Sanderson, who was a failed writer that eventually died fighting alongside the guerrillas in El Salvador. And it recounts the naivety or idealism of this writer who traveled across the globe trying to remake it in his own image. The Price of Peace, Money, Democracy, and the Life of John Maynard Keynes by Zachary Carter. So this is a 650-page biography of the economic theorist that lived in the early 20th century and was very influential to a lot of leading political figures going forward in time. And he was a member of the Bloomsbury Group and led a very fascinating life, but that was also filled with a lot of contradictions, which the author tries to untangle over the course of this biography. A Saint from Texas, and this is the new novel by one of my favorite writers, Edmund White. I read this just a couple weeks ago, and it is such an entertaining and funny and insightful novel that recounts the lives of identical twin sisters who were born and raised in the 1950s in Texas, but they go on to lead very different lives. They have absolutely opposite personalities, where one is very pious and, quote-unquote good, and who eventually moves to Colombia to become a nun and do charitable work, and the other sister is very materialistic and promiscuous, and she moves to Paris to ascend to the heights of Parisian society and lives a very glamorous life. And it's really fascinating how he recounts the connection between these two sisters and how it's a sort of contrast in these different identities. Sisters by Daisy Johnson. This is the second novel from the author who is still the youngest author to ever be shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And this novel is set in the North Yorkshire moors in a cottage inhabited by a mother and daughter. The mother is struggling with depression and the daughter is suffering from the after effects from being bullied. So it recounts their relationships, and it's meant to be very dark and twisted with some shocking events. I really enjoyed this author's first novel, Everything Under. I think her writing is absolutely beautiful and looks at things from a very interesting slant. So I have a digital copy of this novel and I'm really looking forward to reading it. Unworthy Republic, The Dispossession of Native Americans and the Road to Indian Territory by Claudio Saunt. This is a nonfiction book by a university professor that looks at the origins and repercussions of the 1830 Indian Removal Act and how this was a deliberate economic and political strategy by the government which could have been avoided and which contributes to the legacy of racial injustice which is still felt today. So those are the top 10 books of the year as decided by Publishers Weekly, even though this is very early to be making a list like this. But like I said, a lot of these books I think sound really interesting and I'm keen to read them now. So let me know if you would recommend any of them in the comments below, or if you're really interested in reading any of them now, let me know. Or if you already want to put in your choices of the top books of the year in the comments below and encourage me to read them, I'd really like to hear about them. So thank you for watching. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.